Hello and welcome to Redaction. This is going to be the first of a series of head-to-head discussions that we have with various people, various guests. Today I'm joined by Redaction's very own Declan Carey, and we're going to be discussing the divide between the north and the south of England, commonly known here as the north-south divide. Everyone from the country, I'm sure, is familiar with it. To our international audiences, we're going to start by breaking this down a bit, see what the north-south divide is, what it means, what the implications are, and we're going to be delving a bit into what the political consequences of it have been, and an upcoming by-election in the north of England that may tell us a lot about this. To those of you who are not sure how English accents work, I'm from the south of England, though I have spent some time living in the north myself, whereas Declan here is from the north of England, but he now lives in the south. So yes, get your heads around that one. Declan, how's things going?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, James. Yeah, and probably people can tell in our accents where we're from different parts of the country, but yeah, we've lived in both, so I think it's I think we're quite a good team to tackle this topic today.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll throw this over to you to start with. You're the northerner here. What is the north-south divide? What does it mean?
Oh, I mean that's a big question. I suppose what it means to me is the differences in opportunities that people get in the country. So when you look at things that people have in the south and you look at things that people have in the north, there are stark differences there. You can look at data, you can look at economic data, you can look at health data, but you can also just look at investment in regions, investment in businesses in different areas. So there's a really good series which I like to follow on YouTube by the Guardian journalist John Harris, and he did an episode in Manchester recently. And I thought that was a really good representation of that divide, because they were in Collyhurst in Manchester, which is, having grown up in Manchester, is a fairly deprived area. People there often don't have very good opportunities in life, maybe to go to university, maybe to choose what kind of job they want to do. And he was in Collyhurst, and he actually flashed back to 2016, which was obviously the EU referendum and everything like that happening. And there was an area of land which was just a mess and it hadn't been updated. There was some old goalposts that had fallen apart and everything. And then it came to 2000, and I believe it was 2020 when it was filmed. So it's 4 years later, and it was still the same. It hadn't been touched. And the people there, when he spoke to them, just said how nothing had been done in the area. So I think for me, that's one of the telltale signs of the north and south divide, is that often when things are missing in the north, like areas for young people to go and even just play football with their mates, youth clubs, often they're just not there, and the investment's just not there. Whereas I find that, having lived in the south, I live in London at the moment, it's just another world sometimes. You do see nice parks, nice areas. I'm kind of lucky because I live near Richmond Park now, which is obviously an amazing park, but it's not an amazing park
of London, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. And it's not an amazing park for nothing. It takes money to keep it clean. They need to make sure that the repairs are made when it's done. Whereas, the park where I grew up in Manchester, you wouldn't go there at certain times of the day because you just knew that you'd get in trouble there. So for me, that's one of the big differences from my own personal experience of the north and south divide. I mean, what was it like for you, having grown up in the south in, I think, a fairly rural area? What was it like going into a city like Manchester?
Yes, so yeah, I grew up in in a variety of places in my childhood, but mostly in the south of England. Well, almost exclusively in the south of England. Though the place where I went to secondary school was in fairly rural Somerset. Although I haven't picked up the accent to show for it, but yeah. Yes, comparing that to Manchester was, like you say, it's poles apart. Obviously, I think the one distinction that's hard for me to say is because I've never lived in London myself, and sort of how a city in the north would compare to a city in the south. Because I've lived in Manchester, and like you say, there are some parts of it that are very, very visibly quite deprived, and you just think, I've visited London, considerably smarter city. What's happened here? What's happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember, and actually, this is something I picked up from an interview I did with a guy from IPPR North, the think tank. They obviously they do research into regional division, and yeah, one thing that the chap told me was that, you know, when we do think about the North-South divide, we do need to remember that there are parts of London which are very deprived, and you know, I wouldn't want to claim for anyone who's an international viewer for this that, you know, London is just this wealthy city where everyone has all these opportunities. You know, that's just not true. And, you know, obviously there are parts of Manchester which are fairly wealthy as well. I mean, you look at areas like Didsbury, and you've got, you know, Cheshire, sort of just a little bit further south of the countryside, which are, you know,
plenty of places in the south that are quite deprived, plenty of places in the north that are very wealthy. Try comparing somewhere like Weymouth with somewhere like Harrogate.
Yeah, exactly. And but that's the thing. I think you just get these poles of division. Like there's not enough being done to tackle these divisions. And as much as, you know, there are areas of the south which are fairly deprived, but, you know, when you look at some of the statistics as well, as I did before this episode, you know, this was something I found in the Health Foundation. They did a study looking at healthy years of life. So obviously how long someone's going to live, roughly expecting, you know, to have a healthy, good standard of life, can go to work, can do whatever they want. And you look at the map of it, and of course there are areas in the south which, you know, maybe it's a little bit lower. It was mostly areas of London and Cornwall. But when you look at the north, you just see these big red splodges scattered around, mostly in the formal industrial areas in Scotland as well, the northeast, the northwest, in Manchester. One of the examples was, you know, look at the county of Surrey in the south, one of the home counties, fairly wealthy county. Healthy years was 68.6, whereas compared to Manchester, it was 57.9, which is like, it's almost a 10-year difference. And that, for me, that's just incredible that we have, you know, literally a 10-year difference in, you know, like living healthy in a country where, you know, that's like a probably 2-hour journey. It kind of baffles me, and I guess it probably baffles some of our listeners and watchers too. But yeah, a lot of work needs to be done.
I mean, you mentioned healthcare. I remember sort of, if I were down here in Salisbury and I wanted to, which is where I live at the moment, if I were trying to get a doctor's appointment, it would be, I'd call up my local doctor's surgery. Absolutely no problem getting a doctor's appointment. I remember when I was living in Manchester, one time when I was living there, I remember suddenly getting these really severe abdominal pains, and I was thinking, have I got appendicitis? Going to A&E there and having to wait 2 hours, and that was a good waiting time, 2 hours, when I maybe, you know, my appendix may be about to burst.
Yeah, it's not good, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I should stress, for somewhere like that, 2 hours is probably a good waiting time. Mercifully, I should clarify, I didn't have appendicitis. I was all fine. We just had a bad bug, but still.
Yeah. So where you sort of grew up then, was healthcare quite good? And the reason I asked that is because it's quite interesting for me, because in London as well, I think because I live in London now, and because it is a, you know, massive big city with, you know, a huge city, over 10 million people here. I found it to be a little bit like that sometimes. Like when you need to call the GP, sometimes they'll just say we've got no appointments. And yeah, I was a bit surprised at that actually. But I
think there's an extent to which we're talking perhaps more a rural-urban divide than a north-south divide to an extent. I mean, obviously, like you cite those statistics, I'm sure there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, look, there are plenty of rural areas in the north, plenty of rural areas in the south. So I think obviously there is much more of a pressure on, you know, hospitals and GP surgeries in cities, in, you know, densely populated areas, especially under a pandemic, of course.
Yeah, definitely. No, it must be the case. But yeah, I mean, but also I think, you know, we spoke a little bit about the health statistics, but we can also look at the economic factor as well. You know, again, I mentioned the think tank IPPR North, and they did a State of the North report in 2019, which was looking at actually how the North compares to different regions of the country. I mean, you know, I'm kind of underselling them a bit there, because they do a lot more than just that. You know, they look at such detailed intricacies between regional, you know, areas in the UK. But that's one of the big areas they focus on, is the perceived north-south divide. One of the things they found in that report in 2019 was that spending on economic affairs is £541 per person less in the north than it is in the South, which is a huge number. And, I just feel like a lot of people in the North know about this. We were kind of talking a bit before this show about actually how people in the North perceive the South and how people in the South perceive the North. And yeah, we're in a good place to compare this. So I think that would be really interesting.
Let's have it.
Yeah,
so Declan, when you were growing up in Manchester, what was the Southerner? What was that stereotype?
It looked a bit like you, to be fair.
Well, I mean, elaborate. Oh, I'm all ears now.
I'm kidding. I suppose the images that come to mind, I suppose you think of, you do think of the rural side of it. You do think of the home counties, the rolling hills and countryside. Also, you can think of, countryside cottages.
I think you're being way too polite here.
Pims and people who watch tennis, but also, I will I will say people who rarely leave those bubbles though. I think something that comes through is that a lot of Londoners, a lot of people in the South kind of think it's the universe, and I never get that. I just think, oh my God, like, having lived in London, all right, admittedly in the pandemic, God, it's not the universe. Like, it's a cool city, but like, to say that it's got everything you ever need, and you don't need to go and visit Scotland or around Wales, it's just stupid. And I think that was some of the views that perhaps I had when I was growing up, is that maybe people in the North travel around a bit more and have more of an appreciation of different areas, whereas in the South, for me, it almost seemed like a bit of an enclosed bubble. I don't know, is that true, do you think? Is there any truth in it?
I think there might be some truth in it. I think part of the reason that might be partly that London is so insular, especially London. I think there has to be a distinction made between at least London and the home counties and the rest of the South. But why London is so insular is because it's hard for other people, especially these days, to get into it. I don't just mean access it full stop. I mean, if you wanted to up sticks from the North and move to London, rent in London is hugely more expensive than it would be in the North, for example. I mean, if you've just been, say, renting in the North, do you think you're going to have enough money for a deposit to suddenly up sticks and move to London?
No, it's not possible.
No.
Yeah. And it's almost things like when you think, I think it's so much more ingrained than, because even on, when you watch television or listen to the radio, you might hear, an advertisement for a law firm or something like that. And it almost seems like it's always with a Southern accent, and it's almost perceived that, well, that's the kind of educated class, the kind of, they have the opportunities to go and do things like that. Whereas if you're from the North and you have a Northern accent, maybe you don't have that opportunity. And I think that's a real shame, because I think a lot of people feel like they kind of have to hide their accents. Maybe, I think I have at some point when I was at university, for example. I kind of felt like it softened a bit. But yeah, I think that's such a shame, because we've got such a variety of accents here, and there is a perception that some are better than others, which is, obviously completely untrue. And what's funny is when you tell people about this from other countries, they just think that's the most ridiculous, stupid thing I've ever heard. And they're absolutely right, because it is stupid, it is ridiculous. But for some reason it exists here, and we're absolutely obsessed by it.
And that is one thing that strikes me, sort of like somewhere like the United States. If you get senators from Alabama, they tend to sound like they're from Alabama. If you get senators, whereas there are so many Northerners in this country, Northern constituencies in this country that are represented by like people who went through, the conveyor belt of public school Oxford, and then get parachuted into a.
Sound like the Queen, basically, and you never know that they grew up in the North, because they just sound like, oh yeah, that's the thing. I don't understand that. I do understand it, because they go to that type of school, and you can have that education. But
I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but former Prime Minister of this country, Tony Blair, public school educated, went to Oxford, was a lawyer, and gets parachuted in to represent Sedgefield.
Yeah, with his strong Scottish accent that we're all familiar with. Yeah, I mean but that's a good example, isn't it? He went to Fettes College, I think, in Edinburgh, and that's a very expensive school. And I'm sure it's a great school, but it comes with that accent, and there's a reason why people have that accent as well. So I think it's all part of this cultural divide that's there. When we talk about the North-South divide, it's an economic one. It's to do with health. It's to do with opportunities. It's also to do with culture. It's to do with how people sound and look as well. I think that's a big part of it. And being from the north, I guess it was really only the last few years when I was kind of thinking, well, I don't want to kind of hide that, especially in a city like London. I feel like I don't want to hide that, and I love hearing different accents. And northern accents, of course, is nice. It's a friendly one. It's something I'm kind of used to. But yeah, when people try and sort of hide their accents as well, I don't know. I find it really annoying now. So it's something which I think we need to change. But yeah, to kind of flip that question onto you then, what were your perceptions of the North, let's say, before you moved there?
This is the worst thing, and this is the gravest admission. And I think this sums it up. I just didn't really think about it. It just wasn't a part of my world at the time. I have relatives in the North, and even still, I just didn't clock it.
What? So you had no idea of what life was like there at all?
No.
No.
And that, I think we've revealed something here, haven't we?
I think we have. So, all right, then let's change the question. So, when you went to Manchester, what were the things that surprised you, or did you think, oh my God, I wasn't expecting it to be like this? Was it more kind of cosmopolitan that you thought it was? Because Manchester's a really cosmopolitan city. There's loads of cultures and languages.
Yes.
So, what surprised you?
Yeah. That's actually quite a difficult question. I'm not into things. I'm not in, again, it's something a place I went to, not entirely sure what to expect. And I think that's just it. Obviously, like I say, I grew up in quite a rural area, and obviously rural areas can be quite isolated communities. So I just wasn't massively aware of what was going on. I mean, if you mentioned the name Manchester before I went there, I'd probably just think, oh yeah, that's where the football is, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure.
But yeah, I think, like you say, I think there might be a stereotype that a lot of Southerners have disdain for the North. No, I think a lot of it is just apathy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Apathy is in maybe kind of what I was getting at before is that you don't need to know it's there because you almost have everything, or that you think you have everything you need here. So why would you leave that? Why would you leave that bubble and go to Manchester? Yeah, it's kind of sad, really, isn't it, when you think about it? Because
I think, from having lived there now, Manchester's a wonderful place. Like you say, really cosmopolitan city, lovely city, very friendly people there, and it's a shame that if you were to ask someone from down south, what's in Manchester, and again, they'd probably just say the football, like I would have done before I went there. Maybe they said, Oasis are from Manchester, aren't they? Is that where they're from? Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, without actually getting into what's actually there. But what's interesting as well is I think in the north, especially the northwest. I mean, we're talking about the north, but I'm from Manchester, so this is kind of where I'm primarily focusing on that northwest region. But I've got friends who came to Manchester from other cities in the north, so maybe from places like Burnley, and even the difference there between sort of a place like Manchester and say Burnley or Blackburn or somewhere like that, or Oldham, which is just east of Manchester. Again, it's such a huge difference because you get these sort of satellite towns which have, again, a lot of.
Yeah, I was about to say, for our listeners who aren't familiar, Burnley is not massively far from Manchester.
No, it's not, but it is culturally though. It just feels like such a different type. Like when you get the deprivation there is higher. Like one thing I can say is that one of my good mates who I do know who lived in Manchester for a while, just said that Manchester was almost like a haven for him because he could be who he wanted to be. If you wanted to listen to this kind of music and wear that kind of clothes, you could do that in Manchester. Whereas in Burnley, you perhaps can't really do that. It's it's very much kind of like a former mill town, former industrial town, and it's there's not a lot going for it really. And, that's such a sad that thing that we've got all these areas in the north, which are kind of just almost just left and ignored and just thought, well, they're existing there, but nothing's happening there. And I don't know. I just think it's such a terrible thing. And, the potential that we're missing out on, to kind of make these towns, make them real places that people want to be and live and can have a really good life there. Because what that would do for the economy, for the people here would be incredible. But, so far it's not happened. There have been efforts, the British government's levelling up scheme, to try and rebalance that address. Before that, we had the Northern Powerhouse, which is kind of George Osborne's sort of child, wasn't it? His big idea. Has any of that really changed a lot? It's changed some things. I'm not sure I would have done enough really.
Yeah. And one thing, I mean, if you go to Manchester just in the last couple of years, you'll probably notice how gentrified part of Manchester has become. You've got all these towering skyscrapers popping up now. And it's just taking away so much of the character of the city. And of course, it's massive influx of sort of professional people. And, Manchester risks going the way of London and just becoming this completely unaffordable gentrified zone.
Yeah, and you look at the northern quarter as well. Like this is like now it's kind of a trendy area in the city centre. It didn't used to be. It used to be a bit of a dump, but they kind of they put a lot of work into doing it up, and now it's quite a trendy area. I actually used to live there many years ago. It was kind of my first flat and first job after university was in that area. And even then, you could tell the signs were there. You could tell that rents were going up. You could tell that there were a lot of people living in the city centre who weren't from the city, which was weird for me because, I had mates who were Americans, Canadians, and I just thought, wow, I never expected them to be living in Manchester city centre. But you're right, it's that idea of gentrification that, all the prices go up in the centre and it becomes really difficult to live there for local people and they get pushed further out and further out. And when you look at house prices in Manchester, the same thing's happening. They're going up all the time.
And God only knows, this time 20 years, maybe Moss Side will have gone gentrified.
It could be, yeah, it could be that. I mean, that's it's really close to the centre, really close to the unis. I'm sure there've been loads of people who would want to buy land and houses near that area. So it could well be, yeah.
And you're from Manchester, Declan. Could you sort of explain what Moss Side's reputation right now is?
Yeah, I mean, be totally honest, it's getting better. Moss Side, I suppose, in the past, I think what you're referring to used to be known for a lot of gang activity, a lot of guns, a lot of crime. I suppose that was in the 80s, 90s, especially when it was quite profound. But now it's getting a lot better. There's a lot of community projects going on there. They're slowly getting around to cleaning up, just community spaces. Like, I spoke about it before, but parks. God, it's so important to have nice parks and spaces where people can go to. And the Alexandra Park in Manchester was one of the actual big areas where a lot of the, I suppose, gang and police activity was in the past. Now it's a much nicer place where people can go and visit. And, that changes the whole heart of a community. So, yeah, we need more investment in these places. And, so far we've not had it, or it's been very slow. But maybe in the future it will come. We've got, Manchester has a mayor now, Andy Burnham, who's a Labour mayor.
Greater Manchester, to be more precise. He covers
mayor, of course, yeah,
all 10 boroughs.
Yeah, but that means a lot, and he's done a lot of good work with the work on homelessness that he's done there. And they recently just announced they're taking the bus transport back under control, which is incredible because, I remember going to school the other side of town, or sixth form, I should say. It's like before you go to university. And you'd get two different buses and you'd have to buy two different bus passes and it would cost a fortune. And it was just such a complicated system. Now in London, you can take a bus for like 150 one way. It's so well organized. So yeah, we really need more ideas like that.
Absolutely. We're moving slightly on, still talking about the north. What's the Red Wall? Do you want to try and break that down for us?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to put it in the simplest way, it's in the north of England, areas of north of England, which traditionally always voted for the Labour Party, usually industrial areas. And I suppose it really came to prominence.
Old industrial areas at this point.
Yeah, I suppose it, became prominent in the 2019 general election that we had when some of them, which had always voted Labour, actually voted Conservative for the first time. and that was a big shock, I think, for the Labour Party. It's one they're still
Absolutely.
recovering from, not very well, to be honest, by how things are going in Liverpool and in Hartlepool at the moment. So yeah, it's almost, I think, like an identity crisis they're having, because so many people in those areas looked up to the Labour Party as the only voice for them. And then suddenly that stopped being the case. It was a very short period of time. I think a succession of leaders that people just had no faith in, didn't connect with them. Being honest, leaders that were from London, that maybe didn't have much to do with the North. So why would people get behind that? Obviously people like Jeremy Corbyn, I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers have heard of, but was an MP in North Islington, wasn't it? So what does that have with the North of England? Why are people going to get behind that? And I think that was one of the issues that came up in that election. And yeah, the Labour is struggling at the moment.
And of course, if you look at trends, those constituencies have been melting away from Labour for years. And, the chickens finally came home to roost in 2019. And of course, a lot of these constituencies were Brexit voting constituencies. What do you think? I mean, I actually don't know what was your stance on the EU issue yourself, but what do you think drove a lot of these places to vote for Brexit and then, of course, abandon the Labour Party over this issue?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's such a complex one that it's hard for me to answer, but I'll try my best to articulate my thoughts. But I think that Brexit was a masking issue. So Brexit was never the issue, I don't think. Like, whether we stay in or out of the EU, I think has very little effect on the day-to-day lives of many people. And by that, I mean, maybe some companies lose some money, and, maybe the way trade is done differently, but day-to-day at the moment, I don't think we've seen much effect. I think what it was below the surface, there was this issue of, again, North and South, that was part of it, that economic divide. It was a conservative government at the time who said, we want to remain. David Cameron was obviously the prime minister at the time. And I think people looked and thought, well, why should we vote? Why should we vote for you? Why should we listen to you? You don't represent us. You represent that kind of, southern elite that's never listened to the North. Doesn't give us what we need or what we want. Why should we listen to that? And it was almost like a vote of anger. I think a lot of people voted because they didn't know what else to do. They had nowhere else to turn. Labour, has a almost like stranglehold in many areas of the North. But when you keep voting for the same party for so long and things don't get better, what else can you do? So I think a lot of people voted to leave because it was the only way they could get their anger out and say, actually, we have a voice. And to be fair, they proved they did. They did have a voice. And I think after that, after the shock of that, when many people realised, oh my God, we should be listening to these people now. I think that was a big wake-up call for lots of Britain. Because on Twitter, you see a lot of people who, were shocked at the fact that we left. But actually, when you go out and meet people in some of these areas, you realise there's a lot of anger there. There's a lot of frustration there. And that was just one way of expressing it. So yeah, that's how I kind of try to summarise it at the moment. I mean, what was your view on that? Do you agree with me, or do you have a different?
I think I largely do, yes. I mean, look, obviously a lot of places in the South voted to leave as well, let's be clear. And a lot of very affluent places voted to leave. So this wasn't an entirely, in terms of the country as a whole, the Brexit vote wasn't just a coalition of left behind communities voicing their anger. There were clearly a lot of people in quite privileged positions who wanted a Brexit vote to happen. But like you say, that was a very large part of it. Sort of, people whose vote had been completely taken for granted for decades. I think, if we were going back slightly further, I think New Labour is a large part of this. An electoral strategy brought in by Tony Blair that signalled to quite small segments of the population and basically just counted on the tribalism of tribalism is a slightly patronising way of putting it, but you get the point I'm getting at. Sort of the loyalty of certain northern constituencies that they just can't. Well, who else are you going to vote for? You're going to vote for the Tories, sort of thing.
Yeah, and that isn't it a shame?
And then, of course, that electoral strategy counted. I mean, there was a massive drop in turnout in the Blair years, and then, that sort of political worldview counted on voter apathy. And then when things
Yeah.
don't get better, like you say, people will express that in some way or other. And then when along came the chance to express that, should people really be surprised? You know, I wasn't surprised personally that Britain voted leave. I really wasn't. I mean, I voted Remain myself, but I wasn't surprised by the result.
I think a lot of people were, and I think I was one of those. To being honest, being totally honest, I was actually living abroad at the time when it happened. I was living in the EU country, which was a weird experience to wake up and see that, and be around European people who saw that and were like, what is going on? I have to try to explain that because I was like, I don't know. But yeah, I think because I was living abroad at the time, I think I almost kind of got caught up in that bubble a little bit about, well, it almost felt similar to the Scottish independence referendum, which was only a few years before that, 2014, I believe, which, it was a close vote, but in the end, Scotland voted to remain as part of the UK and, remain the status quo. And I think a lot of people felt, well, eventually it would go that way. And I found the referendum was similar. People thought, well, it might be close. Some people might vote in an angry way, but at the end of the day, people will vote for status quo because it's the way to, the best thing people know what's best for them. And we saw it change for the first time, and it was a big shock to a lot of people. Yeah, where were you living at the time when that happened? Were you in the north then?
I was in Manchester at the time, yes. But
right.
I mean, let's not forget, Manchester quite heavily voted Remain. So I was hardly in, the red wall northern heartlands that suddenly flipped.
Oh, but you do get those voices there, though. I don't know what your experience was, but certainly from where I grew up, you do get those those, I suppose, traditional working class voices there who voted in anger maybe to leave, who maybe would vote Conservative as well, or someone more to the right. I think, from my sort of friendship group growing up, those voices are there in Manchester. I don't know if you came across.
I mean, they're there anywhere to an extent. I mean, like you say, they tended to be more, like you say, in old industrial towns than in big city like Manchester or in London. But yeah, I mean, those voices are still there for sure.
No, so maybe that's why it wasn't such a surprise for you. Maybe if you were in that, that environment, maybe you heard those voices and things. But
I guess, yeah. I mean, I just remember talking to a friend shortly before the referendum, and this is what made me think the country might vote to leave. Here's what he said. Here's the thing you have to bear in mind: the people who want to leave are more excited at the prospect of leaving than the people who want to remain are excited at the prospect of remaining.
Yeah, I think that's
and
true.
That's the moment at which I thought, yeah, I think we might be voting to leave, mightn't we?
Yeah, no, I think that's true because even a lot of Remainers, I suppose now we call them Rejoiners, wouldn't we? But a lot of those people would maybe say, I want to stay in the EU, but
Rejoiner just sounds depressing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does a bit. But, they might say, okay, I want to stay in the EU or I want to rejoin the EU, but it's terrible and I want to reform it. But I think when that's your basis of argument is something is terrible and you're arguing to stay in it, that's not a surprise that a lot of people ignore that because I think, well, why would we say something terrible when we can make something better? At the end of the day, is Brexit going to make us a richer country? I don't think it will, personally. I think it's made a big division in this country, which will take probably decades to heal now. And I think it's kind of enlarged those north-south divides a little bit as well, because I think actually a lot of the EU funding, the projects that I have for funding, was used in deprived areas. It was done to, fund regeneration projects. And without that, I worry whether the UK government will put that in. I don't think they will because a lot of them aren't connected there. They have no idea what's going on there. So I do think
now they're going to use the pandemic spending as an excuse not to do it.
Yeah, I know, this makes it even more complicated, doesn't it? And it gets even worse in this situation. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm feeling quite bleak about the whole thing, to be honest, in some ways, because I feel like, God, where is the hope? The voice that we had, which was traditionally the Labour Party, he's doing a poor show in representing people in the north. The Conservatives are getting rid of what they want. A lot of these red wall areas are voting Conservative. So how do we get out of this? I'm not sure.
And of course, there are a lot of reasons why Labour took such a hammering in 2019. Jeremy Corbyn was a very unpopular leader, yes. I mean, the Brexit stance was a big one. A lot of Brexit voting Labour supporters felt betrayed by the second referendum stance. But I mean, of course, now Labour's leader is, Sir Keir Starmer, man of the people. You know, I'll try not to be patronising, but how well do you think Keir Starmer, okay, who was top lawyer, okay, he was he was the Director of Public Prosecutions, and he was one of the staunchest advocates of a second referendum on the Labour front bench during the Corbyn years. How well is his leadership going to go down among those old? This is a loaded question, I get it, but you know that context has to be there. Let's be clear.
Yeah. So you asking me how well his leadership is going to go down with the North or in the country?
More with the red wall, more with those constituencies that flipped.
Yeah, it's almost a bit like paradoxical, isn't it? Because you see that, you know, a lot of people didn't vote for Jeremy Corbyn because he didn't represent that clean, polished politician. He was this kind of maybe North London, almost kind of liberal hippie kind of, this kind of view I kind of felt a lot of people had of him. You know, so Keir Starmer is the complete opposite. You know, he's the polished, clean suit, and he goes there and, you know, he's had the top job. He's been there, done that. You know, everything about him says politician, which is fair enough. Very, very similar to, you know, I guess how Tony Blair was in the past. But at the same time, he doesn't seem to have much of substance. He doesn't seem to be actually proactively doing much in the North to win back those views. You look at what's happened in some of the northern areas. Look at what's happened in Liverpool. There's a bit of a mess there at the moment with the council there, the Labour Council, where I saw reports that the Conservative government might have to take control there. That's the Labour heartland as well. You know, people are going to remember that. It's not going to go down well.
It's probably, I mean, to our international viewers, Liverpool is probably the most progressive city in England.
Yeah, you could argue that. Yeah, I think you certainly could. And you know, obviously, in a lot of times, Labour have sided with the government on some of the big issues of the day. And I think a lot of people are questioning, well, are you the opposition? I think that's a genuine question that's been asked, and this idea that is very strong in the UK of that Labour and the Conservatives are almost one and the same thing. I think it's got more and more popular over the last few years, and it's hard to argue why, because you know when you look at that, when they barely oppose each other on some of the key issues, you think, well, what's the point in having an opposition?
Well,
and then in the end, yeah, these small. Yeah, in the end, you get these small parties popping up, and they're the ones who actually have to be the opposition, but they don't get the same support. So
I think we're going to get onto a small party in the moment, but yeah, I mean that was always the thing with the Corbyn years: is love or hate Jeremy Corbyn, at least you know he has an ideology, he stands for something. There's an objective difference between him and what the Tories are standing for. With Blair and with Starmer, I mean, look, there are differences between what Blair did and what a Conservative government in his day might have done. Let's be absolutely abundantly clear. I mean, I disagree with this take. You get a lot of people say, oh yeah, Tony Blair was just a Tory in a red tie. I mean, there were some very, there were good achievements of the Blair government, even though I have a lot of criticisms of New Labour and the direction it took the party. You know, but Blair's years weren't a wasted 10 years, let's put it that way, even though there were some, very obvious red spots, shall we say. But now we have a by-election coming up.
Yeah, so this is in Hartlepool. Obviously, it was Mike Hill, who was the Labour MP there, who resigned recently. And yeah, so now there's going to be a by-election, and one of the big issues around that is, I mean, there's a couple, but I suppose one of the biggest ones is you've got the fact that it's supposedly one of these red wall areas where, very traditional northern seat, usually put in a Labour candidate. However, you've also got now the added implication of this Northern Independence Party, who really have seemed to be, building up a bit of momentum, at least if you follow their Twitter feed. Now,
that's a point I was about to make. How much is the Northern Independence Party just a Twitter bubble?
Yeah, honestly, I'm really skeptical about that, because I'm scared that a lot of people are going to follow that and see that they're getting a few hundred retweets and a few people are liking it and think, oh god, that's exciting, let me get on board. Which, fair enough, that's how you can get followers and that's how you can build up, and that's great. But again, I don't think it reflects the reality of what's going on there. I think it's a brilliant idea to have that Northern Independence Party. I think the idea of it is brilliant. And a little plug, but the Redaction politics, our team have covered this quite a lot. We've got a few articles on the site now. So give that a read, because it's really good background reading about where this all came from. And I think it's a great idea. I remember whenever I chat to friends that are in the North, a lot of us always felt, when the SNP, the Scottish National Party, did so well in Scotland, oh God, I wish we had something like that. I wish we had someone who was, really, just who represented us, who lived among us, who was our people, was people from the North who represented, the North, like the SNP do. They do a really good job of that. So I think that there is a big gap there that needs to be filled. But is Northern independence now a good idea? I'm not sure it is. I think the idea behind it is flawed.
Yeah, I agree that the notion of actual Northern independence, I think, is quite pie in the sky. The idea of having a party sort of representing Northern interests specifically, in the way, you get a lot of SNP voters who might not be pro-independence, who just vote for them as a Scottish interests party. And the Northern Independence Party could become something like that. I'm not optimistic about their chances in Hartlepool, let's be clear, but Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah, what makes you say that about them in Hartlepool? What are you doubtful about?
I just don't think they have the profile to make a dent at this point. Stranger things have happened, sure, but not everyone in Hartlepool is on Twitter.
No, I wonder though, just on that point, because I don't know if you saw today, they announced that one of their candidates, they've got 3 candidates who can run in the election. One of them is Thelma Walker,
yes,
who was a former Labour MP, who obviously has that profile. Does that change your mind a bit? Does that make you think, okay, there's a bit of legitimacy there?
Possibly. One thing obviously that a lot of opponents might say is that she was, very much a Corbyn ally.
Yeah.
And the collapse of the Red Wall was very much something associated with Jeremy Corbyn. So that would definitely be something that opponents could wheel out against her. And that's something the Northern Independence Party have to be careful of, is not just getting sucked into the Twitter bubble. But, look, here's the statistics, okay, from the 2019 election. And bear in mind, this is a very Labour seat, usually. 2019 election, Labour held on to it. That was Mike Hill. 37.7% for Labour, 28.9% for the Conservatives, 25.8% for the Brexit Party, and 4.1% for the Lib Dems. And then I think there was an independent and a smaller party who got a fewer votes than that. But still, if you add the Brexit Party vote and the Conservative Party vote together, that's more than 50% of the vote. If all those Brexit Party voters break for the Tories,
yeah, and that's the issue, isn't it? Because they're kind of identifying themselves as a Northern Socialist Party, or it's basically what the Labour Party should be. That's what they're doing with the adage of they want independence as well. Which again, I think the idea is brilliant, and if they can put real pressure on, like we've seen many smaller parties do, with the Brexit Party being a great example of that, then I think that's fantastic, because it could actually be another wake-up call for Labour. It could be something which makes them realise that if they want that vote, they have to work hard for it. They can't just rely on it, like we spoke about. They have done for so many years. But yeah, what happens to the right-wing vote? I think that's a really good question, because a lot of them maybe won't be, younger people who sit on Twitter and retweet things, but they'll be the ones who go to the polling stations. Whereas people who retweet things on Twitter don't always go to the polling stations. So I think that's the divide you've got. I think you're right that there's going to be a lot of kind of attention about this, and you look at the bookies and some of the odds are quite good on the Northern Independence Party. But yeah, it feels more of an internet thing at the moment. Maybe I'll be completely wrong and made to look stupid, but yeah, I just feel that the idea is great, but
the thing with the Brexit Party's right is they had their main selling point basically was having Nigel Farage. The Brexit Party would never have got anywhere if they didn't have, Mr. Brexit himself leading them. Let's be frank. And the Northern Independence Party doesn't have that at the moment. Maybe if Andy Burnham defected, then we might be talking. But
yeah, that would be big. I don't think he will. I think he wants to be Labour leader one day.
He will. he clearly still wants to be Labour leader. Yes,
Yeah, and he could be. He could be. I know he ran before for Labour leader, but
twice.
He never felt right at the time. Yeah, he never felt right at the time because I remember. When was the last time you?
Well, last time was 2015, which was when Corbyn was first elected, and Andy Burnham went into that election being the runaway favourite.
Yeah,
to get the leadership, but then Corbyn came along, and if Andy Burnham had stood on even a moderately anti-austerity platform in that leadership election, he probably could have walked it, but he didn't, and he didn't. So
I think he just needs to be himself. I think in the 2015 when I was thinking of, I remember that he was really forcing home the point that he's from the north and that he's, he was constantly saying, I've got my feet on the ground, I'm a normal bloke, I like my football, I like my, fish and chips, and I'm from the north. And
some might say he's playing identity politics there.
Yeah, because when someone says something so often, you kind of start to this, if someone says like, I'm really honest, really, you kind of think, are you, you kind of doubt what they say. So I think if he just biz himself and says, look at his record, what he's done in Manchester. His record with homelessness in Manchester is fantastic with the bed every night scheme. He's done something now with the public transport, which we alluded to before, which has been needed doing for, honestly, so long. He's doing really good things in the city. He's been, he stood up to the government in the summer and, when they tried to, change the laws there. So it was like, they've done a lot of good stuff there. He's done a lot of good stuff there. So I think use his record, he could become Labour leader, and that could be a way that the North could actually go back to Labour. I think that could be a good route for them. Not the Northern Independence Party, but Northern Labour.
Because, of course, that's something to bear in mind with the most recent Labour leadership election, which was almost a year ago at this point.
Yeah.
There were 3 candidates who made the final ballot, 2 of whom were from the North, one of whom wasn't, and who won.
Yeah, it's a problem. It is a problem. It needs to be addressed for Labour. It's not something they can just shy around now. They need to represent the voters that they need to be the voters they represent. And that's the only way I can see them getting back in.
I mean, look, bear in mind, outside of London, there are hardly any Labour constituencies in the south.
Yeah, that's an issue.
There's a few in Bristol. Exeter's a big one. Ben Bradshaw's quite a long-standing Labour MP there. You won't get any outside of cities in the south that vote Labour.
And Scotland as well is an issue because now the Scottish National Party have swept up all those former Labour seats as well. Now they've lost that back in. They've lost now large parts of the north. They're going to struggle unless they turn things around quickly. And at the moment, the fact that the UK has been doing very well with the vaccines, I think over half the population, or the adult population, is now vaccinated, which is really good. They're making really good progress. The Conservatives benefit from that, of course.
Well, that's one thing Keir Starmer came out recently and said is, the Tories are going to experience a vaccine bounce. In other words, Keir Starmer is basically already conceding this by-election.
I don't think he's conceding it. I think he's right.
I think he's making excuses already.
You think he is? I'm not sure he is. I think I get what you mean, and I think Conservatives will take the by-election.
I wouldn't count on it, but I think it's odds on that the Tories will win it. Yeah,
I think they've got it. When you look at the majority as well, Labour's majority, obviously Mike Hill's last majority in there, between 2017 and 2019, that dropped from 8,000 to 3,500. That's a pretty big swing. Now, after the vaccine and everything that's happened in the last year, I find it hard to see how the Tories wouldn't win this one. That would be where my money would go.
I agree. I reckon the Tory, if you asked me to say which way it'll go, I reckon the Tories will get it. But I wouldn't count Labour out. I'd give it sort of, 65-35 to the Tories, I reckon.
Yeah, and I wouldn't count out that the Northern Independence Party would make a good show of it. I think.
Yeah, I don't see the Northern Independence Party winning it, but
not winning, but I think they'll have a good show of it. I think
I think a win for them will be if they get their deposit back, i.e., if they get more than 5% of the vote.
Yeah, and exactly. But that's where they need to start, and then when they can start to, if they can get that, and they can create their identity there, and they can, show that they're in that community and they care about that community. There's no reason they can't build on that. it's a lot of work, but there's no reason they can't do that. But yeah, Labour, they're in trouble. I think the Conservatives win this. I think there's big questions then over Keir Starmer. There have been already on his policies. What policies is he going to bring in? A lot of that's been unclear for some time. You're losing a by-election in Hartlepool could be something which makes a lot of people doubt him even more. So,
and let's bear in mind that, sitting governments making gains in by-elections is a rarity.
it is, isn't it? Yeah.
And obviously it happened in Copeland back in 2017. But then Corbyn recovered from that by, exceeding expectations in the general that happened a few weeks later. So
yeah, and of course we've got local elections coming up in May as well, alongside that by-election, which again it's hard to see how the Conservatives aren't going to have a big win in this with the vaccine effect. I can't see how
Labour are probably going to hold on to the London mayorship, almost certainly.
Yeah. They probably will. They probably
and
will.
The Manchester mayorship. The one, probably a big one to watch there will be the West Midlands mayorship.
Yeah, I think so too. That's going to be
that's a swing mayorship. So
yeah, which is interesting.
I say swing. It's a recent one. The Tories won. Yeah, the Tories won it last time. So
yeah, and it'll be an interesting one. I think it'll be an interesting election. It's for many reasons. It's Brexit is done now. We're out of the EU. So it's going to be the kind of
Conservatives campaign in 2019 on Get Brexit Done.
Yeah,
yes, they got in on that message, and what happened?
Yeah,
kept their promises.
We've got that to play with, and we've also got the fact that the vaccine is doing so well. We've got the fact that there seems to be chaos in Labour at the moment. It all kind of adds up to a Conservative big victory, which
it does.
Where does that leave us then? How does Labour then crawl that back? with the general election in 2024, Possibly sooner, yeah. I mean, what situation does that put them in to win that back? Because that's a hell of a mountain to climb.
I mean, if Labour loses in 2024, and especially if they lose more seats, which I think is a possibility.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine that. I think it goes beyond saying there are questions they have to answer. I think the party's on life support at that point.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is, isn't it? It really is struggling at that point. And then
we're really slipping in the direction of being a de facto one-party state at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's when the opportunity for these smaller parties really becomes big, doesn't it? Because if Labour collapses, there are a lot of people in those areas who do want a working class vote, who would never vote for the Conservatives, and they do want a left-wing representation. And then, if there's a party like Northern Independence Party who says, right, we're going to put a candidate in your state, people might be too annoyed to vote for Labour, would never vote Conservative. It would be the alternative. They could grow into something big there, which would be super exciting. I think it'd be an amazing thing, because that would put a lot of pressure on that, show that the North needs to be taken seriously. Whether that will happen, obviously, a lot of things need to contribute, but yeah, it would be really exciting, I think, and it could change this country,
Could change this country. Well, I think that seems like an apt note to wrap things up on. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I hope we've illuminated the North-South divide a bit for you. Obviously, please like and subscribe. Click the bell to get more of our content. We'll be having much more content for you on YouTube this year. We have lots of big plans going forward, so subscribe, keep an eye out for that. But for now then, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from Declan.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
We'll see you all soon.